My name is Oya Corbin. I'm 28 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my brother called me at 2 in the morning from a hospital room and asked me for one of my kidneys. I should probably explain something first. I'm a nurse. I work in the critical care unit at Riverside Methodist in Columbus, Ohio. I know what serious kidney problems can do to a person. I've seen how quickly life can change when the body starts losing the fight. So when Kyle's voice came through my phone that night, quiet, shaky, and nothing like the brother I knew, I didn't fall apart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even cry. I listened the way I've trained myself to listen to people who are scared. But Kyle was not one of my patients. He was my brother. He was also the reason I spent 6 years carrying plates at a Denny's just to pay my way through nursing school. And what happened in that hospital room 3 weeks later changed every relationship in my family for good. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is about families, difficult choices, and the quiet moments that end up changing everything. If this story stays with you, leave a comment and make sure you're subscribed. I grew up in Keenan, Ohio, in Hardin County. The population was just under 10,000. It was the kind of town where everyone knew which church you went to and which parking lot your truck was sitting in on a Saturday night. Main Street had a hardware store, a Denny's, 3 churches, and a gas station that still let you pump before you paid. My dad, Gary, owned a small auto repair shop off Route 31. It was just him and one part-time employee. He was good with engines, quiet most days, quick to make decisions, and even quicker to expect everyone else to follow them without question. My mom, Jolene, worked part-time at the county library. She shelved books, helped people with the copy machine, and spoke in a soft voice that always seemed to agree with my father before he even finished talking. Then there was Kyle. He was 2 years older than me. Kyle was the plan. That was how my parents treated him, even if they never said those exact words out loud. Trade school first, then maybe a business degree, then back home to help Dad grow the shop. Every dinner conversation somehow found its way back to Kyle. His future, his grades, his applications, his potential. When it came to me, my dad usually had one sentence. "You'll be fine. You're smart. You'll figure it out." That was the entire forecast for my life. I was an A student. I loved biology. During my junior year, my teacher, Mrs. Redmond, pulled me aside and told me I should apply for scholarships. Pre-nursing, pre-med, anything connected to science. She said I had the mind for it. I went home that night almost buzzing with excitement. I told my mom at the kitchen table, the old oak one with the long scratch down the middle from the time Dad slipped with a socket wrench. She smiled and said, "That's nice, honey." Then she called Kyle downstairs to talk about his enrollment deposit. There was a college fund, though. My grandmother, my mom's mother, had set it up when I was born. Grandma Ellen was a retired school teacher from Marion, and she believed in education, especially for her granddaughter. It was a UTMA custodial account with $32,000 in it. Kyle had one too, but his had $18,000. In October of my junior year, I was 17. Kyle was 19 and 2 months into his first semester at the University of Find. I came downstairs after finishing my homework and found my parents sitting at the oak table. Papers were spread out in front of them. There was a pen between them. No dinner on the stove. My dad looked at me and said, "Sit down. We need to talk about the college fund." My stomach dropped before he even explained. Kyle's tuition was more than they had expected. His $18,000 covered his freshman year and part of his sophomore year. After that, there was nothing left. Dad's shop had been slow that quarter. They needed the rest. My fund. "We're going to move yours over to Kyle's account," my dad said, as casually as if he were telling me he had moved a toolbox to the other side of the garage. I stared at him. "That's my money," I said. "Grandma left it for me." Dad leaned back in his chair. "Your name is on it, but I put it there. I managed it. This is for the family." And then he said the sentence that would follow me for 11 years, through every double shift, every tuition payment, every cheap dinner in a studio apartment I could barely afford. "Girls don't need degrees, Oya. You'll get married. You'll be fine." I looked at my mom. She was staring down at her hands. I waited for her to say something. Anything. She didn't. The next morning, I called Aunt Linda. She was my dad's older sister and lived 2 towns over. I told her everything. She sighed and said, "Your daddy knows best, honey. He did the same kind of thing for us growing up." No legal help, no advocate, no adult standing on my side of the line. I was 17. I didn't know what a UTMA account really meant. I didn't know I had rights to that money. All I knew was that every person who was supposed to protect me had just shown me exactly where I stood. I signed the papers at the oak table. The pen was blue. The next morning, I came downstairs early with swollen eyes. Mom was standing at the counter pouring coffee with her back to me. The radio was playing softly. I sat down and asked the only question I had left. "Mom, did you agree with this?" She set the mug down. She did not turn around. "We can only afford one future, Oya." Kyle needed it more than me. She never finished the sentence because she didn't have to. I understood perfectly. I had been placed on some invisible scale beside my brother, measured, compared, and found lighter, and my own mother had stepped onto his side to make sure the scale tipped his way. After that morning, I stopped crying. Not because it stopped hurting, because I finally understood that tears had no value in that house. Nobody was willing to trade anything for what I felt, so I traded in something else. Motion. That same week, I started applying for jobs. Denny's was hiring for the morning shift. A roadhouse outside town needed a weekend waitress. I mapped everything out on notebook paper, hours, wages, rent, gas, and how much I could save before graduation. At the library, I looked up certified nursing assistant programs. I printed scholarship applications on the same copy machine my mother ran every Tuesday. She saw the papers in my backpack once. She did not ask about them. I wish I could tell you I had some powerful speech ready. That I stood in the kitchen and told my parents exactly what they had done. I didn't. I was 17, I was outnumbered, and the people who were supposed to fight for me had already decided I was not worth the cost. So I made my own cost sheet. I finished junior year, then senior year. And the week after graduation, I packed 2 suitcases, moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat on Main Street, and started carrying plates for tips. My mother chose silence. I chose motion. That studio cost $425 a month. It was 1 room, a hot plate, and a bathroom with a shower stall so narrow I had to turn sideways. The laundromat underneath shook the floor every time the machines hit the spin cycle. I worked mornings at Denny's and Friday and Saturday nights at a roadhouse called The Rail off Route 68. Waiting tables taught me 2 things: how to carry 4 plates at once, and how to smile at people who looked at me like I was beneath them. The second skill turned out to be far more useful than the first. I got my certified nursing assistant certificate at 19 through a 12-week program at the community college in Findlay, the same town where Kyle was spending my money on textbooks he barely opened. Then I started picking up shifts at Sycamore Glen, a nursing home on the east side of Kenton. Older residents. 12-hour shifts, vitals, meals, repositioning patients every 2 hours, quiet rooms, long hallways, work most people only noticed when it was not done. It was exhausting. It was thankless. And I was good at it. I opened a savings account at Huntington Bank. The irony of that name would not fully land until years later. I put away everything I could. $40 one week, $60 the next, sometimes only $12. I applied for the Ohio Nurses Association scholarship and wrote my essay about my grandmother, a schoolteacher who believed her granddaughter deserved a classroom of her own. I got $4,000 a year. It was not enough for tuition, but it covered textbooks and scrubs. The rest would come from loans and more plates. I didn't call home for 14 months after I moved out. Mom texted twice, once on my birthday and once on Christmas. I replied with a smiley face both times. Dad didn't text at all. Kyle sent me a meme about waitresses in November. I didn't reply. I started the BSN program at Ohio State when I was 22. I drove to Columbus with everything I owned packed into the back of a Civic I had bought for $2,000 cash from a guy on Craigslist. The passenger window didn't roll down. The check engine light never turned off. I didn't care. Anatomy, pharmacology, microbiology, clinical rotations, 4 years of learning how to think fast and stay calm when everything around you is falling apart, which, when you think about it, was just a professional version of my childhood. I worked nights as a hospital aide at Riverside Methodist and studied during the day. 3 hours of sleep was a good night. 4 was a luxury. The first time I started an IV on a real patient, my hands trembled. The second time, they didn't. By the 50th, it felt automatic. That was when I met Marcy Gill. She was a charge nurse, 6 years in, with a sharp tongue and a laugh big enough to fill the hallway. She saw me fumble during a sample draw in clinical rotation. Instead of reporting me, she stood behind me and said, "Slower. Breathe. The vein is not going anywhere." We started eating lunch together. Then we started covering each other's shifts. Marcy became the closest thing I had to a real friend. Even then, she only got the outline. "My parents and I don't talk much," I told her once. "Family stuff." She nodded. She didn't push. That was exactly why I trusted her. Graduation was in May of 2024. I was 26. I walked across the stage at the Schottenstein Center in a cap and gown I had paid for myself. No one in the audience belonged to me. No dad clapping too loudly. No mom wiping her eyes. No brother whistling from the back row. I owned every step I took on that stage. And when they handed me my diploma, I thought about Grandma Ellen and the $32,000 she had wanted me to have. 2 years later, I was working an overnight shift in the ICU when my phone rang. While I had been carrying plates and staying awake through anatomy labs, Kyle had been at the University of Findlay with $50,000 that had never fully belonged to him. He changed his major 3 times. Business administration, communications, then back to business. He joined a fraternity. He partied most weekends at first, then most weeknights. He graduated in 5 years with a 2.3 GPA and a degree he would never use. After that, he moved back to Kenton, carried his things into the basement bedroom at Mom and Dad's house, and started working the counter at O'Reilly Auto Parts. He was 23 years old, living underneath the same kitchen where I had signed away the future my grandmother tried to give me. Dad said, "He just needs time." Same family, same pattern. Protect the son. Forget the daughter. I heard updates through Aunt Linda whenever she called. She meant well, or at least I think she did. "I think Kyle's doing fine," she would say. "He's just finding his way." Finding his way through one bad decision after another. But sure, he left O'Reilly after a year, worked at a tire shop for 6 months, then at a body shop, then went back to auto parts at a different store. He never stayed anywhere long enough to build anything steady. And somewhere during those years, something was happening that no one wanted to notice. Kyle was tired all the time. He was constantly running to the bathroom. His ankles started swelling. He blamed it on long shifts and cheap shoes. He didn't go to a doctor because men in Hardin County did not go to doctors unless something looked impossible to ignore. Dad had taught him that too. Walk it off. Years later, a nephrologist would explain it to me in clinical terms I understood perfectly. IgA nephropathy, Berger's disease, autoimmune, chronic, made worse by years of partying and zero medical oversight. By the time Kyle went down at work, his kidneys were already in serious trouble. By 28, I had built something, not loud, not flashy, solid. I was a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Riverside Methodist, the same hospital where I had once worked nights as an aide. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Clintonville, a quiet neighborhood north of campus, hardwood floors, a bookshelf I had built from a kit, a cast-iron skillet I used every Sunday morning. Marcy told me once, "You're the best nurse on this floor and you know it." I didn't argue, but if you looked closer, the picture had empty spaces. I lived alone. I had not been in a serious relationship in 3 years. I had not been back to Kenton in 2. My connection to my family was thin enough to see straight through. Mom sent a text every Christmas and every birthday. I sent back a heart emoji. Dad didn't text at all. Kyle sent memes every few months, the kind people forward without thinking. I rarely answered with more than a thumbs up. Nobody at the hospital really knew about my family. Marcy knew I had a brother. She knew I did not go home for holidays. She did not know why. I kept work Oya and personal Oya in separate drawers, and the personal drawer stayed locked. I was excellent at caring for strangers. I could hold a patient's hand at 3 in the morning and guide them through fear with steady hands and a steady voice. But let someone try to care for me, and I would find a reason to step back. That was the scar tissue. 11 years of relying only on myself had made me capable. And closed. I told myself the quiet was peace. Most nights I believed it. Then, on a Tuesday in February, my phone buzzed at 2:14 in the morning. The screen said Kyle. I was charting at the nurse's station when I saw his name. Kyle had not called me in 3 years. The last time was to ask whether I still had his old PlayStation controller, which I did not. That should tell you everything about the depth of our communication. I stepped into the hallway and answered. His voice came through thin and shaky. Oya, I'm at Riverside. They said my kidneys are shutting down. My nurse brain switched on before my sister brain had time to react. Which floor? Who's your attending? What's your creatinine? He paused. I don't know what that means. I'm scared. I leaned against the wall. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. My brother was somewhere inside this building, lying in a bed, connected to the kind of machines I helped manage every shift for other people's families. I'll come up after my shift, I said. Flat. Professional. The same voice I used when I had to explain that the next 24 hours mattered. Then Kyle said, Oya, I'm sorry to call so late. He had taken $32,000 from my future and had never once apologized for that. But he apologized for calling at 2 in the morning. I finished my shift. I charted every patient, checked every line, reviewed every medication, did everything exactly the way I always did. At 6:15 I clocked out, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked down a hallway I had walked 1,000 times. But this time I was not carrying a stethoscope. I was carrying 11 years of silence. Room 412. The door was open. Kyle was propped up in bed, thinner than I remembered. His skin had the gray-yellow tone I recognized immediately, the look of kidneys that had been struggling for a long time. Beside his bed, a dialysis machine hummed. I had stood next to hundreds of those machines. This one sounded different. He tried to smile when I walked in. Nice scrubs, he said. I didn't laugh. I stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him the way I looked at charts, reading the data before the person, IV in the left hand, central line in his chest for dialysis access, fluid restriction written on the whiteboard. He had lost at least 30 pounds since the last time I saw him, which had been Thanksgiving 4 years earlier. I stayed for 2 hours that day and drove back to Columbus in the dark. Tell me what happened, I said. He tried. Months of fatigue, swollen ankles, discoloration when he used the bathroom, which he thought was a basic infection. He did not go to a doctor because he did not have insurance. The auto parts store did not offer it, and he had never signed up through the marketplace. Then, 3 days earlier, he went down behind the register at work. A co-worker called for help, and he was brought to the nearest major medical center, Riverside. The nephrologist, Dr. Brennan, told him his kidneys were functioning at 12%, end-stage renal disease. He needed dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours each session, and he needed a transplant. She said a family member is the best match, Kyle said. Then he looked at me. A sibling. I looked at the dialysis machine. The hum was steady, mechanical, indifferent. I heard that sound every day in the intensive care unit. Most of the time it blended into the background with ventilation fans, hallway announcements, and the soft beeping of monitors. But standing beside my brother's machine, it sounded like a clock winding down. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, I need to think. Then I walked out, took the stairs because the elevator felt too small, got into my car, and sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before I turned the key. 2 days later, my parents came to Columbus. They had not told me they were coming. They called Kyle, got the room number, and drove 3 hours north on I-75 without asking whether I wanted to see them. At noon, Mom texted me. We're here. Kyle's in room 412. Come when you can. Come when you can. It looked like a request. It felt like a summons. I finished my shift, changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, and walked to the 4th floor in jeans and a fleece jacket. Civilian clothes. Dad was standing by the window with his arms crossed, staring out at the parking lot like he was inspecting a repair job. Mom sat in the vinyl chair beside Kyle's bed, holding his hand. She looked older than 55, thinner, grayer, smaller somehow. When I walked in, she stood up and hugged me. It lasted longer than I expected. She smelled like the same dryer sheets she had used my entire childhood. Dad came over and put one arm around me, a side hug. Quick. The kind of hug you give a coworker at a retirement party. Then he got straight to the point. The doctor said a sibling is the best match. You need to get tested. Not, would you consider it? Not, how do you feel about this? You need to, as if it were just another line on a to-do list, somewhere between checking the oil and rotating the tires. I looked at him, same Gary Corbin, same jaw, same expectation that the world would rearrange itself around whatever he had already decided. I'll think about it, I said. His eyebrows lifted. What's there to think about? He's your brother. I didn't answer. I kissed Mom on the cheek, nodded at Kyle, and walked out. In the elevator, my hands started shaking. I squeezed them into fists until they stopped. That night, I sat on my couch with every light off and my phone face down on the coffee table. My nurse brain started running the facts without asking for permission. Living kidney donation, laparoscopic nephrectomy, 2 to 4 hours in the operating room, 4 to 6 weeks of recovery, a lifetime with one kidney. The remaining kidney usually adapts. Most donors live normal, healthy lives, but there are still risks: infection, clots, long-term discomfort, and the small, real possibility that someday you might need help yourself. I knew all of this the way I knew medication dosages, automatically, clinically, without emotion. The emotion was somewhere else, trapped behind a wall I had spent 11 years building. The next day during my shift, Marcy caught me staring at a monitor without actually reading it. She pulled me into the break room. "You look like you haven't slept. Talk to me." So I told her more than I had ever told anyone. "My brother is upstairs, 4th floor, kidney failure. I might be a match." She set her coffee down. "Upstairs here?" I nodded. She stared at me. "You never told me you had a brother." "There are things I don't talk about, Marcy." She didn't push. Instead, she asked the question nobody else had bothered to ask. "Do you want to get tested?" I looked up at the ceiling tiles and counted the dots in one square. "I don't know what I want," I said. "That's the problem." Marcy leaned against the counter. She had that look she got when she was about to say something honest enough to sting. "The testing is the easy part, Oya. It's the conversation you're avoiding." She was right. The lab work, the cross-match, the screening, the psychological evaluation, those were all medical steps with clear protocols. But what I owed my brother, what my brother owed me, and whether those two things could stand in the same room together. There was no protocol for that. I registered for the HLA compatibility panel on a Wednesday. Dr. Adele Brennan handled my intake personally. She had seen my hospital badge and made the connection. She was 45, with calm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of doctor who spoke to nurses like colleagues instead of background noise. "I want to be very clear," she said, closing the exam room door. "This evaluation is entirely voluntary. No one, not a family member, not a physician, not anyone, can pressure you into donating. That is federal law and hospital policy." "I know," I said. "I work here." She almost smiled. The panel took a week. Lab draws, cross-match, antibody screening. I moved through it the same way I handled IV's efficient, clinical, detached. On Thursday, Dr. Brennan called me into her office. 5 out of 6 HLA antigen match. Cross-match negative. Very close compatibility. She looked at me carefully. "Medically, you are an excellent candidate." Then she paused and folded her hands. "But medical suitability does not equal obligation." I nodded. She gave me a card for the hospital's independent donor advocate, someone I could speak to who had no connection to Kyle's care team. I put the card in my pocket and drove home. From the parking lot, I called my father. "I got tested. I'm a match." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Thank God. When can they schedule it?" Not "thank you." Not, "Are you okay with this?" Not, "How are you feeling about giving up a kidney for the brother whose education was paid for with the future that had been taken from you?" Just, "When can they schedule it?" After we hung up, I sat in the driver's seat and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. The engine was off. The parking garage was empty, and I realized that this phone call was the most my father had said to me in 2 years. Every word had been about Kyle. The campaign started the next morning. Mom called at 8. "Honey, the doctor says Kyle is getting worse. His numbers dropped again overnight. They may have to increase dialysis to 4 times a week." She let that sit there. Then she said, "Family is family, Oya. He's your brother. You can't turn away from him over old grudges." Old grudges, 11 years of lost money, abandoned dreams, and family silence, packed into one phrase that made it sound like I was still upset about a childhood argument. Dad showed up at my apartment 2 days later. He didn't call first. He just knocked. I opened the door and there he was in the hallway, wearing his work jacket, diesel still on his boots. He had driven 3 hours for the second time in 1 week, and once again it was not to see me. It was to push me. "The church is praying for Kyle," he said, sitting on my couch without being invited. "Pastor Rick wants to talk to you." "Dad, this is a medical decision, not a church meeting." He ignored that. "Just do it, Oya. Stop making this about you. About me. My kidney, my recovery, my risk, my life. And somehow, I was the one making it about myself." That same week, Pastor Rick called with a gentle voice and rehearsed concern. "Your mother asked me to pray for your family," he said. "She says you're facing a difficult decision. With all due respect, Pastor, this is not a decision the church gets to make for me." I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes. The linoleum was cold. I thought about the oak table in Kenton, the blue pen, the way my mother had looked at her hands instead of looking at me. I decided I would go back to Kenton that weekend, not to give in, to look them in the eye. That night, I stood in my apartment with my phone still warm from my mother's call, thinking about every table I had served, every late-night study session, every bill I had paid alone. And I want you to think about that too. If this story feels familiar, leave a comment. Tell me honestly, would you have answered that phone? Saturday morning, I drove 3 hours south to Kenton. The house looked exactly the same. Tan siding, chain-link fence. Dad's shop out back with the bay door propped open, even though he was not working. Mom and Dad were at the hospital in Columbus visiting Kyle, so the house was empty. I let myself in with the key under the ceramic frog on the porch. Same place it had been since I was 12. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pine sawdust. The oak table was still there. The long scratch down the middle was still there. Everything was still there, except the girl who had sat at that table and signed away the future her grandmother had tried to give her. I wandered into my old bedroom. It was storage now. Boxes of Christmas decorations, a broken treadmill, Kyle's old high school desk shoved against the wall. Something had been bothering me since the HLA results came back. The fund, the paperwork, the details I had never questioned when I was 17. I opened the desk drawer and started going through a stack of old papers, old report cards, a car insurance renewal, an AARP brochure, and underneath all of it I found a cream-colored envelope. The Huntington Bank logo was printed in the upper left corner. It was addressed to Oya M. Corbin, postmarked March of 2016, the year I turned 18, never opened. I stood in that cluttered room with dust floating through the window light and slid my finger under the flap. The letter was 1 page. It said the UTMA custodial account, ending in 4471, established for the benefit of Oya M. Corbin, had reached maturity. As the named beneficiary, I was now the legal owner. I was invited to visit my local branch or call the number below to claim the account and its contents, but the account had been emptied 2 years before I ever turned 18. They had me sign at 17. And when the bank sent the letter, the one that told me the money legally belonged to me, my parents took it from the mailbox and hid it in a desk drawer. They knew. They always knew. I drove back to Columbus with the envelope in my jacket pocket. I did not tell my parents I had been to the house. I did not tell anyone what I had found. I needed to sit with it. The way you sit with a diagnosis before you start talking about treatment. But the pressure did not stop just because I needed time to process. Monday morning, Aunt Linda called. "Honey, your mama is beside herself. She is barely sleeping. You know she just wants what is best for both of you." On Tuesday, 2 women from the church called. Women I had not spoken to since high school, women who knew my name only because my mother had put it on a prayer chain. "We are lifting your family up, Oya. God will guide your heart." On Wednesday, Kyle's ex-girlfriend Amber texted me. We had exchanged maybe 50 words in our entire lives. She wrote, "I know this is strange, but Kyle is really scared. Please think about it." On Thursday evening, Mom called again. Her voice was tight and controlled, like she was reading from something she had practiced in the car. "We have to focus on Kyle right now, Oya. This is not the time for your issues. We can only afford one priority." Same logic, same hierarchy. The son came first. Always. Dad called Friday morning. Short, hard, final. "Your mother is wearing herself down over this. Just say yes." He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask about my evaluation, my surgical risks, my recovery, or how much time I would need away from work. He asked me to stop upsetting his wife. After that call, I sat on the bathroom floor again, the tile cold against my legs. Marcy texted, "You okay? You were quiet on shift." I typed, "Fine." Then I deleted it. I typed, "I'm figuring something out," and hit send. She replied, "Have you actually told them why this is hard for you?" I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. "Or do they think this is just about stubbornness?" Dad came to Columbus for the 3rd time the following Saturday. He sat in my apartment with his knees apart and his hands on his thighs like he was waiting in a mechanic's lobby. I poured 2 coffees. Neither of us touched them. "Look," he said. He was using his problem-solving voice, the one he used when a customer's transmission was finished and they did not want to hear the price. "Maybe I was wrong about the degree thing. You did good for yourself." He waved his hand around my apartment like it was proof. "Happy?" I set my mug down. "Is that what you think I need, Dad? For you to say happy like this is a transaction?" His jaw tightened. "Then what do you want? I'm here. I drove 3 hours. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to understand why you are sitting in my apartment right now," I said. "Because I paid for this apartment with the career I built after you took my money and told me I did not need it." His face turned red. I had seen that color before. It was the color right before the silence came, the shutdown, the freeze that could last for days. "That was 11 years ago, Oya. And Kyle has been living in your basement for 5 of them." He stood up, walked to the door, and turned back with his hand on the knob. "If something happens to your brother because you are holding on to the past, that is on you." The door closed. I sat in the chair and listened to his boots on the stairs, then the front door, then his truck starting in the lot. He said it was on me. But I had spent 11 years carrying things that were never mine to carry. This time, his words did not land where he wanted them to. They landed like confirmation. Sunday night, I was checking on a patient named Dorothy. She was 70 years old, recovering after hip replacement surgery, with no family listed as an emergency contact. She was awake at 2 in the morning, which happens more often than people think. I adjusted her blanket, and she looked at me with watery eyes. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked. "You look like you're carrying the whole floor on your shoulders." A stranger in a hospital gown noticed. My own parents had not. I checked her vitals, made sure her pump was working, dimmed the light, and told her to try to sleep. Then I drove home and sat at my kitchen table. My table, not the oak one in Kenton. I pulled out a notepad. I did not write demands. I did not write a contract. I wrote 3 truths that needed to be spoken out loud before I could give a piece of my body to the same family that had already taken a piece of my future. 1. Acknowledge what happened, the fund, the lie, the hidden letter. Say it out loud in the same room, with everyone present. 2. Dad had to say it to my face, not, "I was wrong about the degree thing." He had already tried that and it landed like a bad check. He needed to say, "I was wrong about you." 3. Kyle had to commit to taking care of himself, follow-up appointments, real support, real accountability, real respect for the body he was asking me to help save, because if I gave him a kidney and he refused to protect that second chance, I did not know how I would survive watching it happen twice. These were not conditions for a kidney. They were conditions for being a family. I picked up my phone and called Mom. "I'll meet you all at the hospital Saturday," I said. "Kyle's room, and I have things I need to say." She was quiet. Then she said, "Okay, honey." Thursday night at 8 o'clock, Kyle's name appeared on my screen, not 2 in the morning this time. I answered. His voice was clearer than it had been before. Still tired but no longer panicked. Dialysis had stabilized him enough to think straight. "Mom says you have things to say at the meeting," he said. "She's nervous." "Are you?" I asked. "I'm on a machine 3 times a week for 4 hours," he said. "I'm past nervous." A pause stretched over the line. Then he said something I had waited 11 years to hear and never expected to hear from him. "Oya, I know I never said this. The money. I knew it was yours. I knew what Dad said was wrong. I just took it because it was easier." Easier. That word sat between us like a stone. For him, it had been easy. An account appeared, tuition got paid, doors opened. For me, it had been 6 years of carrying plates, working double shifts, and sleeping 3 hours between an anatomy textbook and an alarm clock. "It was easy for you, Kyle," I said. "Not for me." "I know," he said. "I know that now." Through the phone, I could hear the hum of the dialysis machine, that same steady mechanical sound I knew from every shift. But it was different coming through Kyle's phone. It sounded like time asking for an answer. "Dad said I should tell you that you owe this family," Kyle added. I told him I wouldn't say that. I closed my eyes. Kyle refusing to repeat Dad's words. That was new. Maybe it was the machine. Maybe it was the 4-hour sessions staring at a ceiling and thinking about what kind of man he had become. Or maybe it was the first time in his life that something had been taken from him, and he finally understood what that felt like. Friday moved in 12-hour pieces. I worked my shift, focused on patients, ran IVs charted, spoke with Dr. Patel about a post-surgical complication in bed 7. Efficient, steady, the same as always. After my shift, I drove home, showered, and stood in front of my closet. I did not want to wear scrubs to the meeting. I chose jeans and a gray sweater. Simple. I did not want to walk in as my family's nurse. I wanted to walk in as their daughter. I took the cream-colored envelope from my jacket pocket and read the bank letter one more time. The paper had grown soft from being handled. The fold lines had started turning white. UTMA custodial account. Matured. Named beneficiary. Oya M. Corbin. I put it in my shoulder bag. Then I called Marcy. "I'm meeting my family tomorrow." She was quiet for a second. "Do you want me to come?" I almost said yes. Marcy was the kind of person who could sit in a room full of tension and not flinch. She had seen medical emergencies, families breaking down in waiting rooms, and people trying to make impossible choices. But this was not her fight. "No," I said. "This one is mine." "All right," she said. "But text me when it's done. I mean it." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table with the notepad in front of me. 3 items. I did not need to read them. They had been forming for 11 years. In Denny's, in nursing home corridors, in anatomy labs, in intensive care rooms at 3 in the morning. They were in my bones now. I set my alarm for 7, brushed my teeth, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling. Saturday arrived the way verdicts do. Slowly at first, then all at once. At 10 o'clock I walked into Riverside through the main entrance instead of the staff door. Different angle. The lobby looked bigger from this side. The information desk. The gift shop with teddy bears and Mylar balloons. Family members checking in with that particular expression. Half lost, half trying to hold it together. I had seen that expression 1,000 times. Today, I was wearing it. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, turned left past the nursing station where I had charted through countless shifts. A colleague waved. "Hey, Oya, you're off today, right?" I nodded and kept walking. Room 412. The door was open. Kyle was sitting up. He looked better than he had the first night. Still thin, still pale in that way I recognized too well, but alert. The dialysis machine hummed beside him. Mom sat in the vinyl chair, a rosary threaded through her fingers. Dad stood by the window with his arms crossed, the same posture he had carried into every visit. Shoulders forward, jaw set. A man preparing for an argument he had already decided he was going to win. There was a fifth person in the room, Janet, the hospital social worker assigned to living donor evaluations. She was in her mid-50s, with a calm presence and a lanyard holding her ID badge. She was there to make sure the process stayed voluntary, standard protocol. But her presence changed the air in the room. Dad could not control the conversation the same way he usually did, not with a witness sitting there who was not family and could not be dismissed as emotional. "Good," Dad said when he saw me. "You're here. Let's get this moving." I sat down in the only empty chair and kept my jacket on. My shoulder bag sat on my lap with the envelope inside. Behind Kyle's bed, the dialysis machine kept marking time. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Everything in that room, the machines, the monitors, the social worker with her clipboard, said medical. But what was about to happen was personal. "I need to talk first," I said. Before I could continue, Mom spoke. Her voice sounded different, thinner, stripped of the polished church tone she had been using all week. "Before you say anything, I need to tell you something." She looked down at her hands. The rosary beads clicked softly between her fingers. "When I was 20, I was pregnant with Kyle, and your father told me we didn't need 2 degrees in the family. He said he would handle the income." She swallowed. "I wanted to be a teacher, Oya." Then she looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. "Nobody ever asked me what I wanted." The room went completely still. Dad stared at the floor. Kyle watched Mom like he was seeing her for the first time. Even Janet looked up from her clipboard. "I told myself what we did with your fund was practical," Mom continued. "Family comes first. That is what I said. But the truth is, I was angry." Her voice cracked. "Angry that you had a chance I never got. A scholarship, a plan, a grandmother who believed in you enough to put $32,000 aside." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "So I let your father take it. Because if I couldn't have that chance, I didn't want to watch you have it either." The admission hung in the room like smoke. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me, and it was devastating. Not because it was cruel, because I understood it. I understood how a woman who had given up her own dream could become the kind of woman who stood by while someone took her daughters. Understanding did not make it right, but it made it human. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," I said. My voice stayed steady. I meant it. Then I said, "But I'm not done." I reached into my bag and took out the cream-colored envelope. I held it up where everyone could see the Huntington Bank logo, the postmark, and my name in the address window. "This is a letter from Huntington Bank," I said, dated March of 2016, addressed to me. I turned it so the front faced my father. It says my UTMA custodial account was ready for me to claim when I turned 18. The money Grandma Ellen set aside was legally mine at 18, not the family's, not Kyle's, mine. I set it on the bed tray between me and Kyle. It was in my old desk, in the room you turned into storage, unopened. Dad's face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, then something harder, a wall going up. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Yes, you do." I kept my voice clinical, the same way I spoke when explaining a medication change to a patient's family, calm, clear, no room for misunderstanding, for "You knew that fund was legally mine at 18. You had me sign it over at 17 when I didn't understand what I was giving away, and no one told me I had the right to say no. And when the bank sent me this notice, you took it from the mailbox and hid it." Mom's hand went to her mouth. Kyle stared at the envelope on the tray like it was a result he did not want to read. Dad's jaw tightened. "We did what we thought was best for this family." "You did what was best for Kyle," I said. "And you lied about it for 11 years. Janet wrote something on her clipboard. The scratch of her pen was the only sound in the room besides the dialysis machine. Still humming. Still counting. "I'm not asking for money," I said. "The legal window has passed. The account is closed. The money is gone. I know that." I saw Dad's shoulders drop half an inch. Relief, probably. Relief that this was not turning into a legal fight. But before I agree to schedule a surgery to give one of my kidneys to this family, I need two things. The room tightened. Janet leaned forward slightly. Kyle's hand closed around the bed rail. "One," I said. "Dad, I need you to look at me and say you were wrong. Not about the degree. You already tried that, and it didn't mean anything. I need you to say you were wrong about me. About deciding I was worth less than Kyle. About telling a 17-year-old girl that her future did not matter because she was a girl." Gary's face went from red to pale. I turned toward the bed. 2. Kyle, I need you to commit to taking care of yourself. Follow-up appointments, a real support plan, real accountability. Because if I give you a kidney and you go back to choices that damage your health again, I cannot carry that. Kyle nodded before I even finished. "I've already started talking to a counselor," he said. "Dr. Brennan helped set it up, and I went to my first support meeting last Tuesday." I had not known that. It landed gently, like a bandage over something raw. Then I looked back at Dad. His turn. And he chose exactly the way I expected him to. He stood up so quickly the chair scraped against the linoleum. "This is emotional leverage," he snapped. "You're using your brother's condition to force an apology." His voice bounced off the walls. Janet sat up straighter. Mom flinched. Kyle closed his eyes. I stayed seated. "I'm not forcing anything, Dad. I'm asking you to see me." Dad paced the narrow strip of floor between the window and the bed. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. His hands opened and closed at his sides. Then he pointed at me. "You've always been like this, always making everything about you." I did not move. "Everything was always about Kyle, Dad. That is literally why we are in this room." Mom said, "Gary, sit down." He ignored her. "She is holding our son's future over our heads." Then Kyle spoke. "Dad, stop." His voice was tired and raw, but clear enough to cut through the room like a scalpel. Everything froze. Kyle had never interrupted Gary. Not once in 30 years, not at the dinner table, not in the shop, not anywhere. Kyle pulled himself up straighter against the pillows. The IV line shifted beside him. The dialysis machine kept its steady rhythm. "She's not holding anything over anyone," Kyle said. "She is asking you to do the one thing you have never done. Admit you were wrong about her." Dad stared at his son. His investment. His plan. The one who had received the degree, the money, the basement bedroom, and every second chance this family had to offer. And now that son, sitting in a hospital bed connected to a machine doing the work his body could no longer do on its own, was telling him he was wrong. I watched Dad's face change. The anger did not disappear. It rearranged itself. Layer by layer, something underneath started to show. Something I had never seen on Gary Corbin's face before. Fear. Not the fear of losing Kyle. He had been living with that for weeks. This was different. This was the fear of a man who had spent his whole life being certain, only to realize that his certainty had hurt the people he claimed to protect. Janet spoke softly. "Mr. Corbin, maybe we should all take a breath." Dad sat down. The chair creaked beneath him. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted long enough for the dialysis machine to cycle twice. Dad sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I had ever heard it, like something inside him had finally been wrung out. "When I was 12, he said, "your Aunt Ruth left school so I could stay." He rubbed his face with both hands. "She was a sophomore, smart, smarter than me. But my dad said somebody had to work, and it was not going to be one of the boys. So Ruth took a job at the poultry plant, and I stayed in school." He looked at the wall. "Not at me? Not yet. Nobody thanked her. Nobody said it was wrong. That was just what families did." "That does not make it right," I said. "No." His hands dropped to his knees. "No, it does not." Then he looked up at me. His eyes were red, not fully breaking, but close in a way I had never seen from him before. You were smarter than Kyle. You were smarter than me. You were smarter than anyone in that house, and I thought that meant you would be fine no matter what, that you did not need the help. He swallowed. That you were tough enough to make it on your own. I was tough enough, I said, but I should not have had to be. He nodded slowly, like something heavy was finally settling where it belonged. But he still had not said the words, the actual words, the ones I had written on a notepad at 2 a.m. The words that had been forming since I was 17, sitting at an oak table with a blue pen in my hand. So I waited. I had been waiting 11 years. I could wait a little longer. Mom spoke first. "Gary," she said quietly, "just say it. She deserves to hear it." I turned to her. Then I said the thing I had been carrying since she called me and told me family was family, since she reduced 11 years of losing my future to old grudges. "You were right, Mom. Family is family. You put mine in a savings account and gave it away." She flinched. The rosary beads clicked against each other. The meaning settled over the room. Family, the future I had been promised, the kidney I was being asked to give. Both mine. Both treated like something everyone else had a claim to. Dad stood up. Slowly this time. Not to pace, not to leave. He turned to face me. His hands hung at his sides. A mechanic without tools, standing in front of something he could not fix with a wrench or a workaround. "I was wrong, Oya." His voice cracked on my name. "Not just about the degree. About you. About what you were worth." He stopped and swallowed. "About everything." I looked at him. Gary Corbin, 58 years old, a man who had built engines, broken his daughter's trust, and spent 11 years telling himself it had been practical. And now he was finally saying the words. I nodded. "Thank you, Dad." My voice did not shake. It did not rise. It did not crack with relief or victory. I sounded exactly the way I sounded when I told a family that a procedure had gone well. Calm, clear, steady. Because that was who I was. That was who I had become while they were not watching. Then I turned to Kyle. "I'll schedule the next evaluation with Dr. Brennan on Monday. They once told me they could only afford one future. It turned out the future they could not afford was the one that came back to help them. Something shifted in that room, not fixed, shifted. Like a fracture that had been grinding for years, finally set back into place by steady hands. It would need time, it would ache, but the bone was aligned now, and that was more than we had had in over a decade. Kyle reached for my hand. I let him take it. His grip was weak, the grip of a man whose body had forced him to slow down in the hardest possible way, but it was real. "I'll do the counseling," he said. "I'll follow every protocol, every appointment, every meeting." "Don't promise me," I said. "Promise your body. It is the only one you have." He almost laughed. Almost. Dad picked up the bank envelope from the bed tray. He turned it over in his hands and looked at the postmark. 2016. The year I turned 18. The year he and Mom had chosen silence over honesty. He set it back down without a word. There was nothing he could say about it that the envelope did not already say for itself. Mom stood and looked at me. "Can I hug you?" I said yes. She put her arms around me and held on. It was not a movie moment. No swelling music, no perfect ending. Just a 55-year-old woman hugging her 28-year-old daughter in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, both of them knowing the hug was 11 years late, and that late was still better than never. Janet closed her clipboard. "I'll note that the family has had a productive conversation. The donor evaluation can proceed at the patient's and donor's discretion." I walked out of room 412, down the hall, into the elevator, through the lobby, and into the parking garage. I got in my car and sat there for 5 minutes before I turned the key. 6 weeks later, I was cleared. Every test, every scan, every evaluation, all green. Dr. Brennan scheduled the surgery for a Thursday in March. Riverside Methodist, my hospital, my floor. That morning, I walked in through the staff entrance out of habit. The halls were the same squeak of sneakers on linoleum, the same overhead pages, the same smell of coffee and hand sanitizer. Marcy met me outside pre-op. She was in scrubs, her badge clipped to her pocket, her hair pulled back the way she wore it on busy shifts. She squeezed my hand. "I'll check on you every hour," she said, "and do not try to be a nurse from the recovery bed." I smiled. No promises. The operating room was cold. The anesthesiologist introduced himself. The lights above me were bright enough to wash every thought clean. I counted backward from 10. I made it to 7. The surgery took 4 hours. Laparoscopic nephrectomy. 3 small incisions, 1 kidney removed, a textbook outcome. I woke up sore and dry-mouthed in recovery, 1 kidney lighter. Kyle was in the next room. His surgeon came by and told me the transplant had been successful. The new kidney had started working within the first hour. Strong function, good response. His body was accepting it. Mom brought flowers the next day. Grocery store daisies in a plastic sleeve. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just real. She set them on the windowsill without making a speech about them. Dad showed up that afternoon. He stood in the doorway for a moment, holding a paper bag. Then he walked in and set it on the rolling table. "Peach cobbler," he said, "from the church bake sale." He looked down at the bag. "Ruth used to make that. You always liked it." Aunt Ruth, the sister who had left school so he could stay. I opened the bag. The cobbler was still warm. Recovery took 5 weeks. My remaining kidney did exactly what the textbook said it would do. It adapted, adjusted, carried on. Same as me. I went back to work at Riverside in April. First shift back, Marcy handed me a coffee and said, "Welcome back. Bed 3 needs vitals." Like I had never left. Like nothing had changed, except everything had. Kyle's kidney was working. His creatinine dropped into the normal range within the first month. He followed every protocol. Appointments with Dr. Brennan, lab checks every 2 weeks, support meetings in Kenton every Tuesday night. He texted me a photo of his 30-day milestone chip. I sent back a thumbs up. Then I deleted it and sent a heart instead. Dad did not call every week, but when he did, he asked about my work. "How's the hospital?" Not, "When are you coming home?" Not, "Are you seeing anyone?" Just, "How's the hospital?" It was small. It was clumsy. And it was the first time in 28 years he had asked about my life without turning the conversation back to Kyle. Mom sent a card in the mail. Handwritten. No occasion. Inside was a photograph. Me at 5 years old, sitting on Grandma Ellen's lap in the backyard in Marion. Grandma's hand was on my shoulder. Both of us were squinting into the sun. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, she had written, "She would have been so proud of you." I put the photo on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Ohio, the one Marcy had given me as a joke. We were not a perfect family. I did not pretend we were. Dad still fumbled conversations. Mom still slipped into silence when things got heavy. Kyle still had days when the weight of every wasted chance settled hard on his shoulders. But we were honest now. And honest was somewhere I could stand. 6 months later, on a Sunday in September, I was on the couch with a book and a cup of tea, my feet resting on the coffee table Marcy kept telling me I needed to replace. My phone rang. "Kyle, the doctor says the kidney is doing great," he said. "She said my numbers are perfect. I'm ahead of schedule." "Good," I said. "Keep your follow-ups." "I will." Then came a pause, the kind of pause that means someone is gathering courage. "Oya?" I opened a savings account. I sat up a little. "It's not much," he said. $50 a month, I'm putting it aside." "Kyle, you don't have to." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." He did not call it repayment. He did not explain what it meant. He just said, "I do." And we both understood. $50 a month from a man working full-time at an auto parts store, a different one now, was not $32,000. It was not supposed to be. It was the first time Kyle had ever saved for someone other than himself, and the act mattered more than the amount. Aunt Linda called once after the surgery. She had heard the story from Dad, the meeting, the envelope, the apology. She stayed quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said, "I heard what your daddy said to you at the hospital. I'm glad he said it." Another pause, then softer, "I wish someone had said it to me." I heard something in her voice I had never noticed before, the same quiet I carried, the quiet of a woman who had been taught that her future was not worth the investment, and who had believed it long enough for it to shape her life. The bank letter is in my nightstand drawer now. I do not need it as evidence anymore. The conversation it forced has already happened, but I keep it, not as a weapon, not as proof, as a reminder. A reminder that asking for what I deserved was the right thing to do, even when everyone around me acted like it was not. Here is what I learned. Giving someone a part of your body is not the hardest thing you can do. The hardest thing is asking the people who raised you to see you as a whole person. But if you never ask, you may spend your life living as less than you are, not because of what they took, but because of what you never demanded back. That is my story. 1 college fund, 1 kidney, and 11 years of learning that my worth was never something anyone else could sign away. If this story made you think about a conversation you have been avoiding, maybe today is the day. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.